We're now in Mill's in the fifth aspect of our Mill lecture. Here we're going to discuss that morality is maximizing utility for all beings. Happiness and suffering in the self and others is of the same importance. The third criticism that Mill looks at is this one. People are too self-interested in their motivations. And Mill introduces the difference between motivation and consequences to address that people are just too self-interested. Up to now, we have addressed Mill's discussion of happiness and moral goodness as if moral goodness consists in maximizing one's own happiness, but that is not so, as we read further in Mill. If happiness is good in itself, and moral actions maximize the good or happiness, then moral actions maximize happiness in the world wherever it is found, in all beings and for all beings. Thus, if action A makes 50 people happy and makes 20 people suffer, while action B makes 60 people happy while it makes 40 people suffer, the morally good action that maximizes utility is A, since its utility is 30. 50 minus 20 equals 30, while the utility of action B is 20. 60 minus 40 equals 20. Here is the most interesting thing. It does not matter whether the self or the people that the self treasures, friends, family, etc., are among those who are harmed, say in action A, in our example. Equal kinds and amounts of happiness matter equally, regardless of in which being they happen to be found. That is the contribution of our intellect to ethics. The intellect learns that happiness is the good and must be maximized. And the intellect itself adds that it must be done impartially for all beings, since no one being's happiness or suffering is more important than that of another, provided that they undergo the same kind and quantity of suffering or happiness. Thus, the morally good action is the one that maximizes utility, happiness minus suffering, in the world for all beings or for as many beings as possible. Animals, as beings capable of pleasure and pain, are also impartially considered in the above principle, which has come to be known as the principle of greatest happiness. However, since animals do not have minds, their suffering and happiness are less, in the qualitative sense, than that of humans. And so individual animals receive less weight than individual humans in calculations of maximizing utility in the world. The last criticism that Mill examines says that human beings are simply not psychologically motivated to maximize happiness of everyone rather than themselves. And if that is right, then utilitarian morality is simply impossible for human beings. Mill responds by pointing out that the pronouncement of that moral actions maximize happiness for as many beings as possible, the utilitarian morality, refers not to the motivations for actions, but to the consequences of actions. In other words, it is possible to do moral actions with non-moral motivations. It is possible to maximize happiness for many beings, even though one is aiming to increase one's own happiness only. A paradigm example here would be someone who helps others for the sake of a good reputation or some other reward. The action would have no moral worth in terms of the Kantian goodwill, but Mill would argue that the action is still moral. In other words, unlike in Kantianism and utilitarianism, the morality of an action is not in the will or character of the agent as motivation, but in the benefits to recipients, in the consequences. Right? If we looked at motivations, then it would turn out that there really aren't that many, if any, moral people in the world. But if we look at the consequences, then there are quite a few moral actions in the world. Actions that maximize happiness over suffering for many beings.